at that point, I knew that probably wasn't a good sign. So,
I will
Surgery
commend you
Friday.
because I think this is the 10th time you've told me that story, and all of the details have stayed exactly the same. So,
it's
a podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake.
Tonight we're going to talk about the competition in Kentucky, where things are heating up, obviously, with the bourbon boom, and lots of, I'd say, like, brand new distilleries have been popping up over the past like 10 or 15 years. And we figured it'd be a cool topic to talk about those, and then also how they have to compete in Kentucky against historic brands like Jim Beam, Buffalo Trace, Heaven Hill, and like the Brown-Forman portfolio and others.
Anyone else
the big
shocked
dogs.
He said Heaven Hill third,
Heaven Hill
not first.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say
feel
it
like
first.
I know. You said it third, not first. It's
Four
like your
Roses.
sly way of not trying to say
Well, you
it.
could just say the big six, but yeah, he had to say
Yeah.
Buffalo Trace and Heaven Hill, but it's
Yeah.
all right.
Hey, I don't talk Buffalo Trace up that much. Dan does.
No, you don't.
But before we get started, I feel like I owe the fans this. I'm going to do a quick
malted
review of the malted rye that I ordered
Nice.
in the middle of the last episode.
Literally
so
in the
this
middle
is the
of the
Basil
episode.
Hayden. Yeah. This is the Basil Hayden malted rye.
And it's 80
the
proof,
nose is
right?
really
It's got
good.
some
It's
nice
80 proof.
color. It looks like it has some nice color.
Yeah, it's a little bit darker than like the normal Basil Hayden bourbon, which is like almost white.
White as a label.
Nose is pretty nice.
It is
very
more than half water.
It's true.
Very rye. Very rye profile on the nose.
And this is a big review because it's coming from a malted rye fan, a big malted rye fan.
It's not Heaven Hill. That's his review. It's not Heaven Hill.
It's not bad. It's noticeably 80 proof.
As is all Basil Hayden.
The finish is actually much better than everything else. Like the rye notes come through on the finish pretty nicely, and you do get a little bit of sweetness along with like the more florally kind of end of the rye spectrum. So it's pretty good.
That's what I thought about the Smoke Wagon malted rye. I got like a ton of floral notes that I did not expect in a malted rye. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of that one. That one's excellent. The Basil Hayden malted rye is not bad. If you're into low proof stuff, this is a good option. Or if maybe you just want to get into rye, this is a decent option.
Yeah, I was going to say probably a good intro to rye, being that it's only 80 proof and malted. Gives it some extra sweetness. Yeah,
and the flavors are a little damped down, so it's not as like in your face as like a barrel proof rye or something like that would be.
Right, how would you compare that to recently you're really talking up the Jack Daniels rye.
The Jack is way better.
It's way better. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The Jack is really good.
Yeah.
I'll second that all day. That bonded rye from Jack is
Jack officially announced that they're releasing a single malt, which was
didn't
part
they have
of
that the triple mash.
It was part of the triple mash, and it was also a special release. Double barrel single malt, I think.
Yeah, we kind of knew the single malt was coming because in the triple mash is a blend of single malt rye whiskey and bourbon, and that was the first time that they've released publicly any single malt distillation. So
Yep.
they kind of hinted that they're going to have a single malt coming. And then they did do the double barrel single malt release as like a limited edition for last year. So it's cool to see them have like an everyday single malt offering.
Yeah, so that'll be cool to try out soon. Right. Well, let's jump into the real topic.
Kentucky.
Yeah. So like Dan, you have a list of some examples of the types of distilleries that we're talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, over the last decade, there's been bunch of newer distilleries coming up in Kentucky, right in the same areas, Louisville, Lexington area that all the other big distilleries are. Some of obviously one of the biggest ones is Bardstown, who not only does their own stuff but does a ton of contracting and just doubled their production. Castle and Key, which has been around for a while or a few years. What would you say there? Yeah, my big fan.
Your favorite distillery down there?
My favorite distillery to go to if you're down there. I don't like to buy things from there, but I like to go to there.
You like to go there and buy lunch?
Yeah, we didn't even eat lunch. I just got hammered there. Speaking of distilleries that Dan loves in Kentucky, that's newer. James Pepper Distilling is new. You'll have stuff like Rabbit Hole is pretty new with some of their stuff only being out for 5 or 6 years. Other things like they've been getting all their stuff contracted or sourced, but Blue Run's building their distillery down in the area. There's just a bunch of new distilleries coming up. Now, obviously, there's a lot of whiskey being sold. And obviously, everyone, when they think of bourbon or whiskey, they're usually thinking Kentucky. And there's just more and more distilleries popping up and that have popped up in the recent past here.
I mean, there's a lot.
Foothold. Yeah, that's just a few.
Just in like the last 5 years, 10 years, obviously there's a lot of new distilleries in Kentucky. So I think we're going to mostly focus on how does a new distillery come about in Kentucky, in the heart of the bourbon country, the bourbon world, and stand out and make a name for themselves. Like, how do they compete against a Heaven Hill or a Buffalo Trace or a Maker's Mark?
Yeah.
Someone that's been established for many, many years.
The first way that you're seeing more and more of how places can stand out is getting away from what you normally think of when you go to a distillery. Very old style, very old practices, very old things. When you see things like Bardstown, when you see the sketches for the new Blue Run, Rabbit Hole, some of these places are going way more modern. Style. A lot of stuff is fully automated. Facilities are more architectural pieces than they are functional. I mean, they're functional and architectural, but the old distilleries are pretty boxy with big old rick houses, where these are curved designs and more pleasing to the eye and looking more like the buildings that would go up in the out in California versus what you would see in Louisville.
They're almost like Silicon Valley tech looking.
Yeah,
type
looks like
of,
more
type
like an
of buildings.
Apple or a Meta location than it looks like they're making whiskey there.
Yeah.
So basically, if you build it, they will come. Type of distilleries. Like, I'm just saying. Like, one example is like if you build a shiny, nice, great looking, cool feature distillery, people are going to come check it out. So that's one way to get people to come and support your distillery in Kentucky, is if you come out with kind of like a new flashy way of doing things, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because a lot of these big distilleries that do have established brands, they are kind of stuck in their ways when it comes to tours and visiting. A lot of them still don't have bars or restaurants on site. The only way to taste whiskey is to do the tour and then get your little 1/4 ounce sample of 2 or 3 whiskeys. So I think like building a really cool place like Bardstown Bourbon Company or Blue Run is definitely a good way to slide yourself right into being an established Kentucky, or I should say well-respected Kentucky brand.
Yeah. And like I don't remember who said it when we were down there last year, but somebody called Bardstown like the millennial paradise because it's like super clean and like like Dan said, kind of like high tech. When you walk in, the screens show all of the like monitoring system of like the entire like still system and the mash systems, and like there's brunch on site, and they've got a little bar where you get like hand stamped ice cubes with the Bardstown logo.
It's kind of like what you expect if you're going down a bourbon country for the first time.
Yeah,
like you kind of expect this whole glamorous experience with all these bells and whistles, and if you were to go down there 5 years ago, you'd kind of be in for a big shock.
Yeah,
Jake, I don't know who said that, but 1,000% it was Adam.
It probably was. Yeah, but I mean, like a lot of these newer places are leaning into that, making less of a distillery and more of like a campus, including things like restaurants and like big tasting bars or tasting rooms, having other like attractions at the site. You know, like Castle and Key does a good job of kind of maintaining the grounds of the old Taylor distillery and really like making it a destination because of, one, the history, and two, it's just like gorgeous there. And like even I'd say there's a few of the older distilleries that are starting to evolve a little bit too. Like I think Makers is in the middle of like a huge renovation and add-on. I want to say there's one or two other big ones that are kind of focusing on that too.
So they all kind of are. Like Jim Beam, when I first went down 4 years ago, they had like a tiny little pop-up barbecue restaurant, which was like a Dairy Queen, like go up to the window and order type of thing. And that was like the first and only place down in Kentucky that had somewhere where you could actually go and order food, and they didn't even serve drinks. It was just like a little pop-up, like food truck almost type of thing. The only way to get a drink was to do the tour, and then you get your 3 tokens. You get little 3 half-ounce or quarter-ounce samples. Like a lot of these places are still very stingy on how much they can serve you, which goes back to like the laws of liquor in Kentucky, which are pretty old school still. But I just kind of bring that up to, because there's a lot of people that are still going down there for the first time, and you kind of expect like a Bardstown Bourbon Company type of vibe at every place, like a big, nice restaurant with all these fancy cocktails and fancy pours, but that's really not what you get. So if you're not an established distillery where people want to go to just because they love your brand and they love your story, you need to do something else to stand out. Now, Castle and Key is like a cool one-off, unique example because they have the story, they have the history, and you go there kind of for that, but you also go there kind of because they're doing the new into bourbon thing where they're kind of revamping and making it a little more modern, while also piecing in all those historic factors with the grounds and preservation.
They're also in like a fantastic spot, like wedged right between Woodford and Willett. So, it's really easy to get to.
Right around Buffalo Trace too. And kind of like if you're going out to Lexington area at all or Frankfurt area, it's a must stop at Castle and Key. So they are in like a very good little spot for visitors, and we can't deny that it's probably the most gorgeous grounds. I would say Castle and Key and Maker's Mark are probably my 2 favorite places to go visit.
The other thing too with some of these more modernized, it is their whole brand is built around that, right? It's not just the way their distillery is built. It's, you look at the bottles that Blue Run, Rabbit Hole, Bardstown puts out, they're completely unique compared to everything else. They have curves, they just have bottles that stand out compared to everything else on the shelf.
Yeah, they just look sharp. Someone put some thought and money into their whole entire brand and marketing.
Yeah. other ways that I think of too, besides like the modern ones where you just say we've talked about Castle and Key. Do you see a lot more of the bringing back old brands as well in Kentucky?
Yeah,
it's kind of the other thing. Now it's not. A lot of these places have been closed forever, but Castle and Key's one. James Pepper is one. That it's their old classic names that have really old DSP numbers, or really low DSP numbers, and it's bringing back something classic from a long time ago. Then the vintageness of it, and it's funny because, like, we think of the one way is modernizing, the other way is bringing back stuff that's really old. And when you go to those distilleries, stuff there is really old.
Yes,
which isn't shocking, but it's building on that legacy or revitalizing that old legacy is another thing that you've seen quite a bit of lately, and just the nostalgia aspect of it brings you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big factor. And like a lot of those brands, like there seems to be two different types of like these startups, particularly in Kentucky, where they either go the craft route and kind of develop a reputation through like very small batch, very like tailored kind of releases, the way like Castle and Key did. Though Castle and Key is kind of a hybrid of these two models. But the other option is like build the biggest fucking distillery that you possibly can and just crank shit out as much as possible and become like a massive contract distiller until your stuff is ready to put in the market.
So that's a good point, because yes, if you're gonna do the massive crank out distillery, I feel like you need to be doing some contract distilling to pay the bills while you're going. Like Wilderness Trail, for example, they started doing a lot of contract. Bardstown Bourbon Company too, although they have the cool restaurant and cool place for people to come visit. But yeah, like there's so many factors. Like how do you compete with all right, we're going to use Heaven Hill for an example again. But like, how do you compete with Fighting Cock, a 6-year bourbon on the shelf for $19.99? Evan Williams bottled and bond, a bonded bourbon for $20. How do you compete with that? You need something that's going to get people excited about your distillery and brand. And it's probably not just going to be bourbon, unless you hit a complete home run and have one really amazing, somehow like, pull the right number out of a hat type of bourbon. You're not going to get people to gravitate towards your brand unless you have something else that's drawing them in.
Yeah. Or you can be like, again, Castle and Key and just nail a rye.
Rye or gin too. Like they make really good gin before they even had whiskey ready. People, which was a bold move because you don't see a lot of Kentucky distilleries leading their way with clear spirits. But they nailed their gin recipes to get. I mean, I had plenty of bourbon people coming at me like wanting Castle and Key bourbon and rye before it was even talked about, only because they went there and had some gin. I hope you killed that fly.
I got him. He's been bothering me for like the last 5 minutes, and he is gone.
Jeez. Because that was intense. But yeah, so like they built up their name through clear, or they created a following through clear spirits, and they didn't even need to because they already had the story, they already had the grounds. So I think that's just, they had 2 out of the 3 things that I would think you'd be looking for if you were starting up a new Kentucky distillery. You need a story. You need a cool place for people to go, and you need good spirits. Those are probably the 3 categories that I'd say to focus on if you're starting up a Kentucky brand, and they had 2 right off the bat. So,
yeah.
Other thing too is if you don't have that, I mean, when I think of Rabbit Hole and I think of Pepper, Rabbit Hole is New Age, right in the heart of Louisville. I think they're right next to Kelvin Cooperage too. Or you have James Pepper, which is a small distillery, but it's in an area where there's restaurants and bars and things where you have an experience where you can go there and spend a half a day and not just have to worry about being at the distillery. It's not like Woodford, for example. It's kind of out of the way. They have the little tasting room and things there. But you're not going to spend 5, 6, 7 hours right in that area of Woodford. There's just not as much to do, where some of these places that are building like in the heart of the city, or, well, I guess, yeah, Pepper's right in the middle of Lexington, where there's other things that can keep your attention and keep you around and give you a reason to go there besides just the distillery. Because as much as I love doing distillery tours, if you're doing 3 of them a day, it's fun, but they're all the same or very similar.
Right.
When I go back down there, I would like to hit some more distilleries up, but I don't think I would cram in as much as I did last time. I'd like to find places where I could stay a little bit longer.
Yeah, don't cram in tours. Cram in places that have a bar or something you can go kind of sit at and enjoy, or like a different experience, like Bardstown Bourbon Company. Sorry to keep dragging you over there, but
I think it's a great place to go.
But they offer like, a barrel thieving experience. Where you can go and actually, you can actually go thieve out of a barrel. Now, the average distillery, like 95% of them don't offer that, even if you sign up for the tasting and tour. Heaven Hill too. Heaven Hill offers like a whiskey connoisseur experience where they dive deeper into like some of their more limited allocated whiskeys. They also offer like a fill your own bottle type of thing. So we're starting to see cooler whiskey experiences, as opposed to like, here's bourbon, it's 51% corn, it's aged in an oak barrel. So these places are starting to realize how many tourists or people they have gathering to them every year. And now it's a destination. There's people traveling all over the world to go to Kentucky. They need to ramp up their facilities and their sites, and they're kind of slowly trying, but I feel like they can't keep up right now. But there's definitely some good progress being made. So it's evident. It's evident that hospitality is a big thing, to get people not only into your brand, but keep them, as a fan of your brand for life.
Yeah, and that was one of the cool things about Pepper was that we got White Dog straight out of the what's the thing called, Dan?
Right out of the doubler.
The doubler. And then
no, they weren't running. It was the spirit safe. We got it out of the spirit safe there. Yep.
I was gonna call it the cage. But then we also thieved on that tour, which was pretty cool. So we got to try the raw spirit and the aged spirit, which is pretty cool. And I think that was the normal tour, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's cool. Which, like, I was just gonna say, thieving, like, maybe to us or maybe to the average, the listener that we have that does a lot of these things, just sounds like, oh, whatever, you got to thieve out of a barrel. But there's a lot of people that's a dream for them. Like, the average consumer of bourbon is like, to be able to take a thieve and take directly out of the barrel and taste it. Like, that's on a lot of people's bucket list. So that's a cool thing for distilleries to offer. Something that I don't really think any of the big guys, the original 6, I should say, are offering that yet.
Even though they probably have enough stock to offer it, but
they definitely do, yeah. Yeah. But it's just, yeah.
Yeah, and I do like the places down there that are offering different levels of tours, because I know Bardstown has like 3 different levels. Because there's their standard tour, there's the thieving tour, there's the tour where you get to fill your own bottle and you drink in the bar in that rick house or something.
Yeah.
And it's nice. And if you are going down and doing a bunch of tours down there, I recommend. We just had a company take care of everything for us. They did a good job of mixing it up, but don't book just the cheap tour on every single one, because otherwise it will be the exact same. Play around a little bit, find something.
Yeah, to Jake's point, like once you do a couple tours, like they are all pretty much the same. Like going to, like, the only ones I'd recommend tours on are like really historic places, or places where you can get like an elevated tour where you get to try things that you normally would not be able to try.
Yeah, I would recommend, like, if you're hitting one area and there's 5 distilleries around that area, sign up for a tour at one of them and then just go and hit the gift shops, check out the grounds, walk around, because there's there's a lot compacted into one area now, in several different parts of Kentucky. But yeah, doing tours at every place can get very repetitive.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I guess that's another way that some of the smaller places in Kentucky that we haven't talked about or don't know too much about, it'd be interesting to see what their tours are.
So
are they? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to bring up one example. I went to Nulu, which is in downtown Louisville, and oddly enough, most of their stuff is MGP. So they're not even really distilling; they're just sourcing for everything, and it's not even Kentucky stuff; it's out of state, and they're kind of specializing on like different finishes. So when you go to Nulu, I remember on our way there, our rep was like, "Yeah, I got you on the tour," and I'm just thinking to myself, like, "Oh God, like not another tour. Like that's the last thing I want to do with my time down here in Kentucky." I go down 4 or 5 times a year, so at this point, like a tour is just banging my head against a wall. But their tour was actually something a little different. So they talked about like prohibition and how whiskey kind of came about and survived through prohibition. So that was, I thought, just something super unique, super different, like never had a tour that kind of focused on that side of things. Mostly it's just like how we put it through the still and all of our basic whiskey terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a couple of the regular patrons at the master classes told me that they actually took the cocktail class at Nulu and said it was absolutely amazing. So like that kind of stuff is really cool to look out for too. And usually you will not find that at Jim Beam or Buffalo Trace or
Jim Beam does offer a cocktail class.
Oh really?
I haven't done it, but I know it's kind of like a quick thing in their gift shop. They have a little like makeshift bar. It looks pretty cool, but there's like 4 years ago, none of these places offered anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's pretty evident that it's becoming a tourist. I don't know, tourist spot's not really the right word, maybe, but it's becoming a destination, a place where bourbon enthusiasts want to go to check out their distilleries, and then people who know nothing about bourbon want to go because they're hearing about all this buzz. Maybe they want to get into bourbon. So basically, it's come a long way. And to sum all that up, yes, you need to do something different if you're a newer distillery in Kentucky. Having maybe 10 years ago, having Kentucky bourbon on a label was all you needed to sell a product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People just wanted Kentucky bourbon. Now there's so much out there. You need to do something different to draw people in. And I did, the name of that one distillery that we were kind of talking about before we started recording was Whiskey Thieves, as like a really small place that I've never been to, but I've heard a lot of people recommend you got to go to Whiskey Thieves. You got to go to Whiskey Thieves. Pretty much just because their hospitality, they focus on giving you a very one-on-one kind of intimate, experience. Like whatever you want to taste, you can taste. You want to drill through that barrel? Sure, go ahead. It's kind of like a smaller distillery you haven't heard of. And you'll get the experience that you wish you would have gotten at a Maker's Mark or at a Jim Beam. So it's kind of it's a cool little off the path place, which again I haven't been to yet, but really it's on my list of places I need to go to for like underground up and coming distilleries.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just outed it, so now everybody's gonna go.
I did. Mm-hmm. Now it's gonna be on the secondary market tomorrow after this episode. I still haven't tasted any of their whiskey, but from what I've heard, it's a great experience going there. And, that's kind of what this episode is about. What you need to do to stand out among the big brands that everybody knows. And I think if you're showing the best hospitality, and you're someone that goes to that distillery for the rest of your life, you're going to remember that and look out for Whiskey Thieves bourbon.
Yeah. And like, the name of the game is trying to get people to stay as long as possible, because usually people buy more shit if they're there longer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of these distilleries, I think, are leaning towards that like campus style model where they have a restaurant, they have a bar, they have a tour, they have, you know, like multiple activities in like within the distillery grounds, so that you can actually spend like 3 or 4 hours there without just like running out of things to do. Because like Buffalo Trace is huge, but like you go on the tour, you go through the gift shop, it's like, all right, let's get the hell out of here, you know. Like
there's nothing else
to
do.
Like,
to be fair, though, that gift shop is massive.
It is, but it also came a long way. Like, they didn't have that gift shop 4 years ago. They had nothing. Nothing.
Yeah. It's not like you can go get a Buffalo Trace Old Fashioned at Buffalo Trace.
No.
No, but you can buy boots that have Pappy Van Winkle barrels in the heel.
And they cost 5
for
times
like
$400.
Yeah.
The same boots without Pappy Van Winkle in the heel.
Yeah. Yeah, but these have Pappy Van Winkle barrels in them.
All right. So we talked about you need to have, you know, a really cool destination place to draw people in. But we haven't really talked too much about creating a really good bourbon to draw people in.
Right.
Are there any places we can think of that have, you know, they're lacking the visitor center, they're lacking the restaurant, but they just have a good new product that is drawing people in?
So I don't know.
That's kind of the reason why Bardstown has to have all that stuff, because they suck otherwise.
That's not true.
It's not true, Dan. I mean, don't get me wrong. The Fusion series isn't Pappy Van Winkle, but I think they do a pretty good job of blending bourbon, and they've done a pretty good job of kind of shifting the average consumer's connotation on blended bourbon.
Yeah.
I mean, they started putting out.
They contract so much stuff that's excellent. So that's just, yeah, you're wrong, Dan. But I haven't been there yet. I really want to go, but New Riff has excellent stuff. I don't know what their
great example
campus actually looks like, though.
They're I'm pretty sure they have a restaurant, but I know it's nothing. It's not like a Hard Truth where it's like a destination, right, you know, adult Disney World type of place to go to.
Yeah.
But I mean, that would be a pretty good example, because they didn't do, you know, the clear spirits. They just stuck strictly to whiskey. And they waited until their stuff was 4 years old, and then turns out their 4-year-old stuff was pretty good. So I think that's a great example of a newer distillery that has built a brand off of just the whiskey alone. And obviously the bottles look cool too. I think that has a little something to do with it. The matte black bottles, that's a nice touch. But yeah, I would say that's a pretty good example right there.
I mean, Blue Run is a semi-example because they're not actually distilling anything, but they're contract distilling at Castle and Key and Bardstown, and probably somewhere else, I would imagine. But I believe their bourbon comes from Castle and Key, and their ryes come from Bardstown. I'm fairly certain that that's correct.
Yeah, see, I'm talking more like a New Riff, someone that really started up from the ground. And
yeah, I mean, I don't know of anybody else besides maybe like some smaller craft kind of places that would fit that description of like started from nothing, are much more whiskey centric than, you know, experience centric, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my point
Jake's thinking of one. Yeah, Jake.
I am thinking, like, I have a couple things in mind. Like, I guess, I don't know if we're talking about like blenders in here too. Like, I would throw Barrel Craft in there. I mean, they're kind of like a home run story out of nowhere. Like, they were nothing and just hit it, you know, right off the gate. But I mean, I guess my point is more so Like you need something more than a good whiskey to bring people in. Like there's just so much out there now. There's so many Kentucky distilleries. You know, to get people excited about your brand, you need something a bit more than a good bourbon and good marketing. Like you need something to draw people to you.
Right. Because like if you have a really good whiskey, you can just go to the store and get it. To get people to actually show up like to your facility, you need something a little bit more.
Showing up is a big part of it, because you're not just going to go buy a new 4-year Kentucky bourbon just because it's Kentucky now. You need you need a story behind the distillery. You need some kind of influence that is telling you, oh, I went to this place, they had the best old fashioned, they had the coolest bar set up, the best restaurant, amazing hospitality, great tour, something that kind of stands yourself out from the next guy. So like if I was starting a Kentucky distillery from scratch, my biggest focus is going to be, what's the one thing that we're going to, people are going to walk away from here and be like, wow, I've never experienced this at any other distillery. And so like
cocktail
this brand, whatever it can be, this brand is going to be with me for the rest of my life. I'm never going to forget about this experience because it's just something different.
That was one of the things about Pepper that we were like blown away by, was they had one of the best old fashions I've ever had in my life.
Well, they should. I mean, that's the whole story. Is James Pepper is kind of what brought the old fashioned to New York,
and see, that's a great story, and that's a new distillery that kind of just ran with a piece of history, and props on them on focusing on what they need to focus on.
Well, I mean, they found the original still designs from the early 1900s and had Vendome rebuild that still from scratch. So it was, I mean, they got a lot of history there, and that was one of the cool things with their tour, was going through all the history, because it's all the big names from the bourbon.
It's literally the catalog of who's who in early bourbon. All just like, it's kind of like Forrest Gump, but bourbon. Or Pepper just meets every famous bourbon tycoon throughout his life.
Gets a loan from Taylor, goes defunct on his loan from Taylor. Taylor gives it to what becomes Woodford. He has to start over. It's just interesting. But no, I mean, we've talked about it. We're still in the bourbon boom. So you're still seeing a lot of these things pop up. But yeah, it's hard, especially in Kentucky, to stand out, because there is so much in Kentucky. And the problem with the Big Six is they've been able to set the narrative for decades and decades and decades.
And they have the inventory to put stuff out at a ridiculous price, where if you're a startup distillery, there's no way you can compete with.
No. But I'm sure there's still going to be more, and I'm sure that we've left some things out that some people are probably pulling their hair out that we didn't discuss.
I feel like we covered a good ground, but I do know when we stop this recording, I'm going to think of something. Yeah. It always happens.
You know what I say to those people that are screaming at us right now? Start your own podcast.
Yeah, right? We appreciate you. Yeah, you're one of the few people that listen to us talk every week while we drink whiskey. So we appreciate you. Don't start your own. Just keep listening.
I know Jake is going to want to talk about Peerless.
Ooh, that's a good one to bring up. That's actually a really good one to bring up.
They're not incredibly old. They're started in the 2000s at some point, right?
I think late 2000s. I think they've only been around for I think a little like 2012 or 13, but they're definitely one of the newer people. Yeah, and a great example, because all right, here we go, because they have a really good whiskey. they have a good product. They have a really cool facility. It's not where it needs to be in terms of, they don't have a restaurant. It's in Louisville, but it's not on like a really poppin', like you wouldn't just stumble across it. You need to kind of look it up and be able to get there. And they just put in like a little tasting bar where they do like little flights after tours and whatnot. But they're I think a great example of a distillery that kind of built their name off of their whiskey as a newer distillery. Like, they a year or two ago didn't have anywhere to go taste whiskey at their facility. And so I think thank you for bringing that up. That's a perfect example of a distillery that has a good name on their whiskey. Now, some people will argue that their stuff is very expensive and overpriced for a young new distillery. Go ahead, throw it out there. I'm not a peerless fanboy. I'm not going to shoot you down immediately. I think their whiskey is very good. Yes, it is pretty expensive. But yeah, what do you think, Dan?
I've talked about it before. I think it's fine. I think it's a $40 or $50 whiskey that sells for $90.
I think their single barrels are where it's at.
Yeah,
so it's $120 bottle that should sell for $50.
They found a niche, and their niche is single barrels, and the ones that they pick for the gift shop, especially, they're very different from one another, and they taste a lot older than 4 to 6 years. Still, it's a little pricey. I get it. It's very pricey for a 4 to 6 year whiskey. But the quality's there, and that's a distillery I would keep a very close eye on over the next decade, because they very well could turn into like the next Willet, where people are just freaking out over these 7, 8, and 9 year single barrels once they come to age.
Yeah. Do they age on site, or do they truck out?
They do. They
somewhere?
They have like one rick house right on site at the distillery, and they have a couple more just a few miles away.
Okay. Yeah, they'll probably start. My guess would be that they're probably going to start working towards some kind of like more reasonably priced product in the future as they keep ramping up, their output.
I would hope. I would hope, they'd come out with some kind of just 90 proof regular offering, but their thing is too, they're kind of like a barrel where they're just like everything is batches and cask strength. But we recently found out Barrel's coming out with a 90 or 100 proof offering, so I guess the possibilities are endless.
Yep.
They filled their first barrel in 2015.
Peerless? Oh yeah. I thought it was a little more recent, but I think that's a prime example of a new distillery that made success by having a good quality product. Dan might not agree with it, but they're not.
I didn't say their product is bad. I said it's good, but it's overpriced.
But they're selling out of all these releases they do at the distillery. Their marketing and branding is on point, and they have good whiskey. It's not bad whiskey. People are obviously willing to pay a premium to get their whiskey, so they're doing something right. And it's not a destination. It's not a cool restaurant or facility to come check out. People are going there because their whiskey is good.
Well said.
If you
thank you.
Yeah, I think if you we all recommend going down to Kentucky if you're a whiskey fan and haven't gone down. It's not go to Lexington or Louisville. You're going to find a ton of distilleries in the area. Hopefully, if you are going down there, this will help guide you to some of the ones that you should be going to based off of different experiences. And continue to try out new whiskeys coming out of Kentucky. They're pretty good. Don't just stick with the original 6 or the big 6 down there. Try some new things. You can sample a lot of these things in the bar at Gold Eagle. I know for a fact because I've sampled some there.
Damn, thanks for the plug, Dan.
I know I was kind of leading you into that, and then I saw you were chewing food, so I thought I'd just ramble on a little bit longer just so you could get a finish on that. How's the finish on that cracker?
We got 2 apples.
Not even one of the Trader Joe's ones. Jeez.
No, they had a recall. That's why you haven't seen them. the famous Trader Joe's crackers had a recall. So
don't eat the crackers at Gold Eagle Tastings.
Don't worry, I checked all the dates, and apparently all the dates that we bought were outside of the recall. But still, we haven't had them in about a month because Trader Joe's has been out of them. So hopefully those come back soon because those rounds are amazing. But yeah, rushed home from the store to hop on this podcast, so I didn't really get to eat dinner. Grabbed a couple crackers, grabbed a couple bottles of bourbon. We're here.
Sounds like dinner to me.
Sounds good. It's good with me too. But yeah, goldeaglewine.com. Check us out on Facebook at Gold Eagle Wine. Gold Eagle Spirits. Check us out on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine, and stay up to date with all new releases and events, products, whatnot. Come check out the bar, like Dan said.
Jake, where can people find us or listen to us?
You can find us at Bourbon Matters on Instagram and Facebook. You can listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, or any other podcast platform. We have video on YouTube and Spotify as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's kind of our thoughts on breaking out in Kentucky for whiskey. Cheers, I guess.
Cheers.